My name is Mattie, and I'm 62 years old. Yesterday was my last day working at the Phoenix Post Office. After 35 years of sorting mail, helping customers, and building a life I could be proud of. I thought retirement would feel different, maybe scary or empty, but all I felt was excitement. You see, I had plans. Big plans. My navy blue 2018 Ford F-150 was sitting in the driveway ready for the cross-country adventure I'd been dreaming about for years. I was going to visit every national park, sleep under stars I'd only seen in pictures, and finally live for me. What I didn't expect was for my daughter-in-law to have her own plans for my truck. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story about family respect and sometimes the sweetest revenge comes in the most unexpected packages. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 out of pure habit. For 35 years, that alarm had been my daily call to duty, and apparently, my body hadn't gotten the retirement memo yet. I padded to the kitchen in my slippers, making coffee in the quiet house I'd bought after my divorce 15 years ago. It wasn't much, just a 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood outside Phoenix, but every mortgage payment had been mine. Every decision, every repair, every small improvement had been my choice. That independence meant everything to me. As I sipped my coffee and watched the sunrise paint the desert sky orange and pink, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement in my chest. Today was the start of my real life. I had maps spread across my kitchen table, marking routes to the Grand Canyon Yellowstone Glacier National Park. I'd saved every spare penny for this adventure, and my trusty F-150 was going to be my home on wheels. Around 9 o'clock, I heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway. My son, 34 years old and still my baby, even though he stood 6 feet tall and had a master's degree in software engineering. He'd been working for a startup company for the past 2 years, developing some kind of app I didn't fully understand, but was proud of anyway. Behind him came Stephanie in her pristine white BMW sedan, the one she'd bought just 6 months ago. Stephanie had been my daughter-in-law for 3 years now, and I was still figuring her out. She was 29, a corporate lawyer with perfectly styled blonde hair and an opinion about everything. Don't get me wrong, she was smart as a whip and successful in her own right, but she had this way of making suggestions that didn't really sound like suggestions at all. "Morning, Mom," Marcus said, giving me his usual bear hug. "How does it feel to be a lady of leisure?" "Pretty good so far," I laughed. "Though I keep checking the clock like I'm late for something." Stephanie air-kissed my cheek and immediately started looking around my living room with that expression I'd learned to recognize. It was the same look she'd given my curtains last Christmas, when she suggested I might consider something more modern. Or the look she'd given my kitchen when she recommended I update my appliances to stainless steel. We settled in the living room with fresh coffee, and I couldn't contain my enthusiasm about my travel plans. I pulled out my maps and guidebooks, showing them the route I'd planned through Colorado and Utah, talking about hiking trails and scenic overlooks I'd researched online. "That sounds wonderful, Mom," Stephanie said, but her tone had that careful quality I'd learned to watch for. "But I have to ask, have you really thought this through? I mean, driving all those mountain roads at your age in such a big vehicle." I felt my smile freeze a little. "I'm 62. Stephanie, not 92. And I've been driving for 46 years without so much as a parking ticket." Of course," she said quickly. "I just worry about the practical side. Gas prices these days, and that truck gets 15 miles per gallon, plus maintenance costs insurance. Have you considered that maybe it's time to think about something smaller, more economical?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I could see him looking between his wife and me, that familiar deer-in-headlights expression he got when Stephanie started one of her improvement campaigns. "The truck runs perfectly," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've maintained it religiously since I bought it." "I'm sure you have," Stephanie continued. "But honestly, Mom, it's just not practical for someone in your situation. I mean, what do you really need a truck that size for anymore?" Before I could answer, she dropped the bomb that would change everything. "Actually, we've been talking, and we think you should sell it. Marcus and I have discussed this extensively, and we really believe it's the right move for you, financially and safety-wise." The room went completely silent, except for the ticking of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend my right to make my own decisions. Instead, he just nodded slowly, like he was agreeing to some reasonable proposal. "We've already reached out to a dealer," Stephanie continued, pulling out her phone. "Jim Morrison from Desert Auto Sales. He specializes in used trucks, and he said he could come take a look next week. I think you'll be surprised how much equity you have tied up in that vehicle." I sat there holding my coffee cup, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't a suggestion or a concern for my welfare. This was a plan they'd made without me about my property, my dreams, my life. "Well," I finally managed my voice surprisingly steady, "if that's what you think is best." I smiled at them, the kind of smile I'd perfected over the years when dealing with difficult customers at the post office. Pleasant, agreeable, completely unreadable. Stephanie looked relieved. Marcus looked guilty. And I started planning my counterattack. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking to the living room window, looking out at my truck sitting in the driveway under the streetlight. The moonlight caught the navy paint job, and I remembered the day I'd bought it. It was 3 years ago, right after I'd finally paid off the house. I'd walked into that dealership with a cashier's check for $32,000 money I'd saved penny by penny from my postal worker salary. The salesman had tried to steer me toward a sedan, something more appropriate for a woman my age, he'd said. But I'd known what I wanted. I wanted something strong and reliable, something that could take me anywhere I decided to go. That truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was my declaration of independence. I thought about my ex-husband, Robert, and how he'd controlled every financial decision we'd made during our 20-year marriage. How he'd dismissed my dreams of travel as impractical, my desire for adventure as foolish. The divorce had been the best decision I'd ever made, even though it left me starting over at 47. Now, here was my own son, married to a woman who thought she knew what was best for me better than I did. Around 2 in the morning, I called Dorothy. She'd been my friend and colleague for 20 years, and even though she was probably asleep, I knew she'd want to hear about this. "Mattie, honey, what's wrong?" Her voice was groggy, but immediately alert. I told her everything from Stephanie's concerns about my age to their plan to have the dealer come look at my truck. Dorothy listened without interrupting, but I could practically hear her blood pressure rising. "That manipulative little—" Dorothy caught herself. "Sorry, honey, but that girl has some serious nerve. Your truck, the one you saved for and bought with your own money, the one you maintain better than most people maintain their marriages. I just can't believe Marcus went along with it," I said, surprised by how much that part hurt. He just sat there nodding, like she was making perfect sense. "Men," Dorothy snorted. "They'll agree to anything for a quiet life. But Mattie, you can't let them do this to you. That truck is yours, and more than that, it's your future. Don't you dare let them take that away from you." "I don't plan to," I said, and for the first time since the morning's confrontation, I felt my backbone straighten. "Good girl. Now, what's your plan?" I spent the next hour talking it through with Dorothy, and by the time I hung up, I had the beginnings of an idea. But first, I needed to do some detective work. The next day, I started paying attention to things I'd been too polite to notice before, like how Marcus had been looking stressed lately, running his hands through his hair during conversations about work. How Stephanie had been dropping hints about expensive purchases, showing me pictures on her phone of furniture and vacation destinations that seemed well beyond what a startup employee and a junior associate should be able to afford. I remembered Marcus mentioning that his company had been behind schedule on their latest project, and that some investors were getting nervous. I remembered Stephanie talking about the BMW payment being higher than she'd expected, and how their mortgage on that fancy house in Scottsdale was stretching their budget. Then I did something I'd never done before. I looked them up online. It started innocently enough, just checking Marcus's LinkedIn to see how work was going. But then I found myself on Stephanie's Facebook page, scrolling through photos of their life together. There was the BMW gleaming in their driveway, with the caption, "Finally got my dream car." There was their house, a gorgeous Adobe-style place, with a pool that probably cost twice what my little ranch was worth. But it was the comments on Stephanie's posts that really opened my eyes. Friends asking how they could afford such nice things. Stephanie responding with vague comments about good investments and planning ahead. One friend had even posted a laughing emoji with the comment, "Must be nice to have rich relatives." That's when I found the post that made everything clear. Stephanie had shared an article about financial planning for aging parents in a closed group called Managing Family Assets. The article talked about helping elderly relatives make smart financial decisions, including selling unnecessary vehicles and downsizing expenses. But it was Stephanie's comment on the article that made my blood run cold. This is so relevant right now. Sometimes you have to help family members see what's best for them financially, even when they resist at first. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the computer screen. This wasn't about my safety or practicality. This was about money. They were planning to sell my truck to solve their own financial problems, and they were justifying it by convincing themselves it was for my own good. I closed the laptop and walked back to the window to look at my truck. $32,000. That's what it had cost me new, and even with 3 years and 45,000 miles on it, it was probably still worth close to $28,000. $28,000 that would solve a lot of problems for a young couple who'd overextended themselves. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own son was going to let his wife manipulate me out of my property, my independence, my dreams, just to bail them out of their financial mistakes. I made a decision that night, sitting in the dark, looking at my truck. If they wanted it gone, I'd make sure it disappeared. But not the way they expected. I woke up Thursday morning with absolute clarity. For the first time in 3 days, I felt like myself again. Strong, decisive, and completely done with being anyone's victim. The solution had come to me around dawn, and it was so perfect I almost laughed out loud. I thought about my niece Sarah, my brother Tommy's daughter, who'd been like my own child since Tommy died in a car accident 5 years ago. Sarah was 26, fresh out of medical school, and working as a resident at Phoenix General Hospital. She worked 80-hour weeks, made barely enough to cover her student loans and rent, and had been driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic that broke down more often than it ran. Last month, she'd called me in tears because the Honda's transmission had finally given up completely. She couldn't afford the $3,000 repair, but she also couldn't afford a car payment. She'd been taking the bus to the hospital, adding 2 hours to her already brutal daily schedule. I picked up the phone and called her. "Aunt Mattie." She sounded surprised but happy to hear from me. "How's retirement treating you?" "Pretty interesting so far," I said. "Sarah, honey, I need to ask you something. Are you still having car trouble?" "Oh, the Honda saga continues." She laughed, but I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I'm still taking the bus. Yesterday, I had to leave 2 hours early for a surgery rotation because of the schedule changes. It's ridiculous, but what choice do I have?" What if I told you I had a solution? A really good one. I explained the situation to Sarah, carefully, leaving out the part about Stephanie and Marcus's financial manipulation. I just told her that I decided to downsize and wanted to give the truck to someone who really needed it. "Aunt Mattie, I can't accept something like that," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "That truck is worth more than I'll make in 6 months. Sarah, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to spend your life helping people, saving lives, making the world better. If I can help you do that by giving you reliable transportation, then that truck is going exactly where it should go." We talked for another 20 minutes with Sarah, alternating between grateful tears and protests that it was too much. Finally, I convinced her by pointing out that the truck would just sit in my driveway, depreciating if I kept it. But it could be changing lives if she had it. Besides, I added, Your father would want me to take care of you. This is what family does for family. We agreed to meet at the DMV that afternoon to handle the paperwork. Sarah insisted on giving me $1 for the transaction to make it legal, and I agreed. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones that cost almost nothing but mean everything. After I hung up, I called Dorothy to tell her the plan. "Oh, honey, that's brilliant." She practically cackled into the phone. "That little schemer is going to have a cow when she finds out." I wish I could see her face. The best part is it's completely legal and completely final. Once those papers are filed, there's nothing they can do about it. You're giving that truck to someone who actually deserves it. Sarah's going to be able to help so many people with reliable transportation. Your brother would be so proud. That afternoon, Sarah met me at the Arizona DMV office on 35th Avenue. She looked tired from her night shift at the hospital, but her eyes were bright with excitement and gratitude. The clerk, a woman named Janet, who had been working there for 15 years, recognized me from my postal route. "Miss Mattie, I heard you retired. How are you enjoying it?" "It's been full of surprises," I said, sliding the paperwork across the counter. "I'm transferring my truck to my niece here." Janet processed the paperwork efficiently, chatting with Sarah about medical school and her plans for the future. When it was all finished, Sarah handed me a crisp dollar bill and Janet handed her the new registration. "Take good care of that truck," I told Sarah as we walked out of the building. "It's been good to me and I know it'll be good to you." "I'll treasure it, Aunt Mattie, I promise." That evening, I cleaned out the truck one last time. I left Sarah a note in the glove compartment with the spare key, along with the maintenance records, and a gift card to the mechanic I'd been using. Then I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, remembering all the places that truck and I had been together. Weekend trips to Sedona, drives through the desert to clear my head after difficult days at work, the day I'd driven it off the lot, knowing I'd bought it with my own hard-earned money. "Thank you," I whispered, patting the dashboard. "Thank you for representing my freedom. And now you get to represent Sarah's future." Friday morning, I got up early and made a special breakfast. If I was going to put on a performance, I wanted to do it right. I was scrambling eggs when I heard cars in the driveway. Marcus's sedan and an unfamiliar pickup truck that probably belonged to the dealer. I opened the front door with my biggest smile. "Good morning. You must be Jim?" The dealer was a man in his mid-40s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with his dealership's logo. He shook my hand enthusiastically and started talking about market values and demand for well-maintained trucks. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to say, from what your son and daughter-in-law told me, this is exactly the kind of vehicle we're looking for. Late model F-150s in good condition are selling fast right now." Marcus looked uncomfortable, like he was hoping to get this over with quickly. Stephanie was practically vibrating with excitement, probably already spending that $28,000 in her head. "Well, let's take a look at her," I said, leading them toward the driveway. Jim walked around the truck, checking the tires, looking under the hood, taking notes on his clipboard. "Excellent condition," he murmured. "Regular maintenance, no rust, low mileage for the year. I'd say we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 28,000, maybe 30, if we get the right buyer." I saw Stephanie's eyes light up. 28,000 would probably cover their BMW payments for a year and give them breathing room with their mortgage. So, Mrs. Patterson, are you ready to talk numbers? Jim asked, pulling out a folder of paperwork. That's when I dropped my bombshell. Oh, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, I said, maintaining my cheerful tone. The truck isn't actually available for sale anymore. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear a dog barking 3 blocks away. What do you mean? Stephanie's voice was sharp. I mean, I transferred the title yesterday. The truck now belongs to my niece Sarah. She picked it up about an hour ago. Jim looked confused. Marcus looked stunned. Stephanie looked like someone had slapped her. I'm so sorry you made the trip for nothing, Jim, I continued. But, as I'm sure you understand, once the ownership has been legally transferred, there's really nothing more to discuss. You gave it away. Stephanie's voice was rising. You gave away a $30,000 vehicle. I gave it to a young woman who's going to use it to save lives as a doctor, I replied calmly. Someone who actually needed it, rather than someone who just wanted the money from selling it. The truth hit Stephanie like a freight train. Her face went through several shades of red before settling on a kind of pale fury. This is completely irrational, she sputtered. You've just thrown away your financial security for some misguided sense of charity. Have I asked. Because from where I stand, I've just made sure my property went to someone I love and trust, instead of being sold to fund someone else's poor financial decisions. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, we never said we wanted the money for ourselves. Didn't you? I looked him straight in the eye. Because I know about the BMW payments, Marcus. I know about the mortgage on the house you can't really afford. I know your startup is behind schedule and investors are getting nervous. I know because I took the time to pay attention. Stephanie was furious. This is none of your business, and you had no right to interfere with what was clearly a sensible financial decision. You're absolutely right, I said. Your financial problems are none of my business. Just like my truck was none of yours. Jim was backing toward his own truck, clearly wanting no part of this family drama. I'll head back to the lot. Call me if anything changes. After he left, Stephanie launched into a lecture about family responsibility and practical thinking and how I was going to regret this decision. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching my son seeing the shame and guilt written all over his face. Finally, Stephanie stormed off to her BMW, leaving Marcus standing in my driveway, looking like a man who'd lost his way. Mom, he started, but I held up my hand. Marcus, we need to talk, but not with an audience. After Stephanie peeled out of my driveway, with enough force to leave rubber marks on the pavement, Marcus and I sat on my front porch swing, in the kind of silence that stretches between people who have too much to say and no idea where to start. I'm sorry, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Mom. For which part? I asked. For going along with your wife's plan to sell my property without my permission, for not defending me when she basically called me too old and incompetent to make my own decisions, or for needing my truck money to bail you out of the financial hole you've dug yourselves into. He winced, with each question running his hands through his hair, the way he'd done as a child when he was in trouble. All of it, every part of it. You're right about everything. Tell me about the money, Marcus. How bad is it really? For the next 20 minutes, my successful, educated, responsible son told me about maxed out credit cards and investment mistakes, and keeping up with appearances that had slowly strangled his finances. The BMW payment was $800 a month. The mortgage on their house was $4,000. His startup hadn't paid him in 6 weeks because of cash flow problems. Stephanie keeps saying it's temporary, that once I get my next funding round, we'll be fine. But Mom, I don't know if there's going to be a next funding round. And even if there is, we've been living beyond our means for so long. Why didn't you come to me? I asked. Why didn't you just ask for help instead of trying to manipulate me into giving it to you? Because I was ashamed, he said simply. Because I'm 34 years old and I should have my life figured out by now. Because Stephanie said asking you for money would make us look weak and irresponsible. So instead you decided to make me look weak and irresponsible. He flinched. When you put it like that, God, Mom, what have I become? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind and strong, and saw how far he'd drifted from those values. But I also saw the little boy who used to help me in the garden and tell me about his day at school and promise he'd always take care of me when I got old. You've become someone who forgot that family means protecting each other, not using each other, I said. But Marcus, people can change. People can remember who they really are. I don't know if Stephanie sees it that way. Then maybe you need to decide what matters more, your wife's opinion or your own integrity. We sat in silence for a while, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across my small front yard. Finally, Marcus stood up. I need to go home and have a serious conversation with my wife. And Mom, I'm proud of what you did with the truck. Sarah deserves it. And you deserve to make your own decisions about your own property. Thank you, I said. That means more to me than you know. After he left, I called Sarah to check on how she was adjusting to her new wheels. She was practically bubbling with excitement. Aunt Mattie, I drove it to work today, and I felt like a completely different person. No more leaving 2 hours early, no more standing in the rain at bus stops. I can pick up groceries after my shift. I can visit friends. I can have a life outside the hospital. You've given me so much more than a truck. You've given me something to sweetheart. You've reminded me what it feels like to make a difference in someone's life. That evening, as I was watering my tomato plants in the backyard, I heard my phone ring. It was Dorothy. So, how did the big confrontation go? I told her everything from Jim, the dealer's assessment, to Stephanie's tantrum, to my honest conversation with Marcus. $28,000. Dorothy whistled. That girl was going to sell your truck for $28,000 to pay for her fancy car. The money was never really the point, I said. It was about respect. It was about them thinking they knew what was best for my life better than I did. And now I'm learning that sometimes the best way to keep what matters most is to give it away to the right person. Over the next few weeks, my relationship with Marcus slowly began to heal. He started coming by for Sunday dinner, usually without Stephanie, who was apparently still furious about the whole truck situation. We talked about his work, his marriage, his plans for the future. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of the son I'd raised, the man with integrity and kindness who'd gotten lost somewhere along the way. Stephanie and I maintained what could generously be called a polite truce. She was civil when she had to be, but I could tell she viewed me as an obstacle to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. That was fine with me. I'd learned that not everyone in your family has to understand you or approve of your choices, as long as you understand and approve of them yourself. Sarah sent me pictures from her road trip to San Diego to visit medical school friends, something she never could have done with her old car. She sent updates about hospital rotations she could get to on time, about groceries she could buy at reasonable prices, instead of whatever was available near the bus stop, about the simple freedom of being able to go where she needed to go when she needed to go there. And me, I started taking pottery classes at the community center. I joined a hiking group for people over 50. I volunteered at the literacy center, teaching adults to read. I discovered that retirement wasn't about the big adventure I'd planned. It was about all the small adventures I'd never had time for when I was working. 3 months after the truck incident, Marcus came to Sunday dinner with news. He'd found a new job with an established company making less money, but with steady pay and benefits. He and Stephanie had sold the BMW and bought a used Honda. They were looking into refinancing their house or possibly selling it for something more affordable. It's hard, he admitted. Stephanie's not happy about the lifestyle changes, but I'm sleeping better than I have in 2 years. Money problems are fixable, I told him. Integrity problems are much harder to repair. I know that now. As we were cleaning up after dinner, he asked me something I'd been wondering about myself. Mom, do you ever regret it? Giving away the truck instead of selling it. You could have had that money for your own retirement, your own security. I thought about that for a long moment, looking out the kitchen window at the empty driveway where my F-150 used to sit. Marcus, for 35 years, I went to work every day and followed other people's rules and schedules. I spent 20 years married to a man who thought my dreams were impractical. For most of my life, I did what other people thought I should do. I dried my hands and turned to face him. That truck represented the first time I'd ever bought something big and expensive just because I wanted it. It represented my independence, my freedom to make my own choices. And when I gave it to Sarah, when I chose who deserved it, and why, that was the most independent thing I'd ever done. I never thought about it that way. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is give something away on your own terms rather than let someone take it from you on theirs. 6 months later, Sarah called to tell me she'd been accepted into a residency program in pediatric emergency medicine at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She was driving the truck cross-country to start her new life. I'm going to take good care of it, Aunt Mattie, and someday, when I'm an established doctor and some young medical student needs help, I'm going to remember what you taught me about passing it on. That's all I could ask for. I told her. That night, I sat on my front porch as the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. My driveway was empty, but my heart was full. I'd learned something important in my first year of retirement. Real freedom isn't about having the biggest truck or the most impressive retirement account. Real freedom is about making choices that align with your values, even when other people don't understand them. I'd also learned that family isn't just about blood relationships or marriage certificates. Family is about who shows up when you need them, who respects your choices, even when they don't agree with them, and who loves you enough to let you live your own life on your own terms. The truck was gone, but the independence it had represented was stronger than ever. Because real independence isn't about what you own. It's about who you choose to be when someone tries to tell you who you should be. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight, but to choose who deserves your gifts. That truck taught me more about freedom in giving it away than it ever did when I owned it in my driveway. Because real family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Have you ever had someone in your family try to make major decisions about your life without asking you first? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family respect and finding your own way forward. Share this with anyone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and make choices that matter. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your independence and dignity are worth protecting no matter what anyone else thinks. Take care of yourselves and keep making choices that make you proud.